Thanks for coming, everybody. It's been awesome being in Australia so far. So this is going to be the story so far of TrainYard. And what I'm going to do here is basically talk for about 10 minutes about the actual story of TrainYard and kind of the whole process of creating the game. And then for the second 10 minutes or so, I'm going to talk about kind of just a bunch of like frequently asked questions and sort of lessons I've learned along the way. So first, what is TrainYard? Well, it's a logical puzzle game. So there are no timers, there are no scores. The only thing that matters is solving puzzles. And you do that by drawing tracks for the trains to follow. So on the example up on the screen, there's going to be a blue train on the left, a yellow train on the right. They're going to come out and follow the tracks and combine to form a green train. So color theory plays a huge role in the game, the kind of mixing of primary colors into secondary colors. And then timing plays a huge role, that either getting trains to kind of mix and crash together or avoid each other in different ways. And this is obviously like a super simple puzzle, but later on the solutions get incredibly intricate and become like these sort of logic circuits of trains kind of colliding together and doing crazy things. And that's really all I'm going to talk about the actual game itself. This presentation is going to be more about just the actual process of creating the game. So first of all, a little bit about myself. Obviously, my name is Matt, and I live in Brampton, which is a suburb of Toronto in Canada. And back in 2009, I was working at a company in Toronto doing Flash development. And I was working making kind of like mini sites, like these really interesting, crazy projects. And it was actually a job that was pretty fascinating, making some really interesting stuff, and yet for some reason, it just wasn't what I really wanted to do. I've always had a huge passion for games. I love not just playing games, but I love like game mechanics and games as more of like an art form, as something really interesting and expressive. And so as much as I enjoyed my job, I just felt like I really wanted to be doing something that was more specific to games themselves. And so in 2009, I said, I'm going to make a game somehow. I hadn't made a game since I was back in high school. I'd made some like cheesy little game, and that was it. And so for some reason, 2009, I don't know what exactly changed, but I said, I'm just going to make a game. And so I had to commute into work on a train, and every day on the train, I would sit there coming up with game ideas. And so one day, I was thinking about paint and how paint colors mix together, like I was talking about earlier. And I guess because I was on a train, I kind of combined those ideas together and ended up with the basic ideas behind TrainYard. And then I prototyped it out on paper, and it seemed really interesting. And then I made a Flash prototype. And so that's what you can see on the screen here. It's like this super ugly, cheesy thing with just like colored squares as the UI. But this prototype, the moment I played that and started playing around with it, I was like, this is huge. There's a ton of potential here. The mechanics have so much depth to them, and every little change I made just led to amazing results in like the game design of the game. And the more I played with it, the more I realized I had something really special here that I'd kind of discovered. Rather than invented it, I really felt like I'd almost discovered something. And so I was playing with this Flash game, working as a Flash developer, and I had an iPhone at the time, but I didn't know anything about iPhone development. But the more I played with this prototype and used my iPhone, I realized this would make a much better iPhone game than it would ever make a Flash game. And despite not knowing anything about iPhone development, I said, this would make such a cool iPhone game. I've just got to do whatever it takes to learn iPhone development and figure out how to make this game a reality. And so in June of 2009, I started the initial development of TrainYard. And the first thing I wanted to do was actually learn iPhone development. So I didn't even have a Mac. I'd only used Macs before, like in school and stuff like that. So I went out and bought a used MacBook on Craigslist, and I started learning. And I discovered a framework called CocoaStudio, which a lot of you are probably familiar with if you looked into iOS game development. And I built this test game called Quaddy, which you can see in the bottom right there. So Quaddy is kind of like a tic-tac-toe-ish game with a few kind of interesting twists on it. And so I did the kind of ugly graphic design of it, and there are menus, there's a credit screen, there are online high scores, And this game still sits on my laptop, but no one really other than me and my wife has ever played it. The only reason I made Quaddy was to get experience with Cocos 2D to make sure I didn't make any mistakes on TrainYard. So it was solely made just to make sure that TrainYard didn't have any huge glaring errors that I was afraid I would make making my first thing with the technology. So with that under my belt, I started the actual iPhone development of TrainYard. And my plan for that was to work for about 3 months, so October, November, December, and have the game finished for the Christmas vacation. And this, again, I'm working at a day job, so this was all my spare time. And as you can imagine, it didn't work out this way. Finishing a game in 3 months in your spare time is not easy to do. So December came around, and the game wasn't really done at all. It kind of ran on an iPhone, but it was glitchy and had all these bugs, and all these features were missing. But the potential was there. So I just kept working on it. And for about 4 more months, I kept working on it. And finally, coming up to May of 2010, the game was getting really close to being complete. And then something happened. I had a baby. Or, well, more specifically, my wife had a baby. And this is Torin, and he is amazing. He's really cute and awesome. And he was actually born a month early. He was supposed to be born in June, and instead he was born in May. And so I knew I was finishing up TrainYard, and then all of a sudden, my plan was to finish the game and then have all this time to spend with my baby that was going to come a few weeks after the game was done. Instead, this kind of, at first, obviously my main concern was for the baby and all that stuff, but in the back of my head, I'm kind of thinking, like, am I ever going to finish TrainYard now? Like, hearing all these horror stories about having kids and stuff like that. I mean, so I didn't really know. But it turned out to actually work out even better than it ever could have. My boss at my job was nice enough to give me a month off to help my wife look after the baby. And so it turns out that newborn babies actually sleep like a whole lot. And so I was able to use all that time in May that my boss had given me off to basically just work on the game and finish it up. And finally, I submitted it to the App Store on June 1st. So I estimate, I wrote 500 hours because it's a round number. I think the actual number is actually quite a lot higher than that. And if you notice the dates, that's basically a year of time from June to June that I spent on it. And there's the front end, obviously, in Objective-C. There's a whole web-based back end that has Flash and a whole like MySQL and everything where you can view other people's solutions. So I did all of that. And then also all the visual design, sound design, and of course game design and puzzle creation and everything. So there's a lot of different aspects that went into the game. So anyway, so I submitted it on June 1st, and then during the approval week, I did marketing, which to me, it was basically what I knew marketing might be. So I told my friends and family about the game, I emailed app review sites, and I created a trailer. Those were basically the 3 things I'd heard you should do, and so I did them. And so after that, the game came out, and players loved the game, or at least the players that did play the game loved the game, but there actually weren't that many people playing it. So TrainYard came out, and it made an average of about, it was priced at $2.99, as you can see, and it made an average of about $30 a day, which means maybe like 15 to 20 people downloading it every day, which actually as like extra part-time income, having an extra $1,000 a month is pretty sweet, especially to be getting like $1,000 a month from a game. But at the same time, because of how good the feedback was from the people that were playing it, I just knew I could do better somehow if I could just get people to notice it, but I wasn't really sure what to do. And at the same time, I started feeling a lot of jealousy. So Touch Arcade, which you've heard mentioned earlier today, is this huge iOS app review site, and they didn't review the game or mention it at all. I tried emailing them, and I just couldn't hear anything back from them. Apple didn't feature the game on the App Store. And the thing that killed me was that all these other games that were like similar kind of logic puzzle games came out in that same period, and they did get featured, and they did get written by Touch Arcade, and written about by Touch Arcade. So that was I was like, what am I doing wrong? Like, what's wrong with my game? Is this game secretly horrible? And I don't know. Like, that was frustrating, but at the same time, I really did feel like I had something good. And so I did basically the one thing I knew how to do, which was just to keep working on the game. And so I just kept improving the game and releasing updates and poring over every single App Store review and Twitter messages and emails and fixing all the little tiny nitty-gritty issues that everyone told me about. And just kept making the game better. And that carried on for 4 months. And then coming up to October of 2010, I created TrainYard Express. So this is kind of like a light version of TrainYard, but unlike a lot of light versions, I didn't just want to kind of cut the full game down into the first 10 levels or something like that. So I created 60 brand new puzzles, and rather than calling it TrainYard Lite or something, I called it TrainYard Express to differentiate it. And so 60 brand new puzzles from scratch. I spent well over a month in my spare time just creating those puzzles alone, because I wanted to make something that could stand on its own as a full game. If people, like, if I deleted TrainYard, the full game, from the App Store, people could still be completely satisfied with TrainYard Express. And really, my plan was just to make something that had so much value that people couldn't ignore it, that they almost had to start talking about TrainYard. And I figured that if they were talking about TrainYard Express, maybe eventually they would start talking about TrainYard too. And so that was actually really effective. The moment TrainYard Express came out, or maybe a few minutes after that, a really popular Italian iPhone blog wrote this huge glowing review of it, and it shot to the #1 free app in Italy within literally a few hours. And that day of being #1 free app in Italy, it got 22,500 free downloads. So to put that number in perspective, in the previous 4 months up to that point, the game had had about 2,500 downloads. And all of a sudden, in a single day of being free, almost 10 times more people had played the game. So that was huge. And I was like, well, maybe this is actually going to work. And then, so with it building up in Italy and being #1, all of a sudden I started watching charts around Europe, and it's going up in the UK, and so that was amazing. And then I got this email from Apple saying, we want to feature your game on the App Store, the kind of like request for artwork sort of thing that you get from them. And I was like, I don't even really know what this means, but people have said this is amazing, so I'm gonna take their word for it. And it was amazing. So to show you, TrainYard went from making about $30 a day to, on the first full day of being featured, making $5,000. So it was crazy. Still looking at that, what is that? That's insane. And so that was nuts. And I was thinking, this is the craziest thing ever. I just made $5,000. Is this even real money? And it was insane. And then reality started checking in. I'm like, okay, working out the math. And so it makes $5,000. And then the next day it makes $7,000. And the next day it makes $9,000. And at this time it's still priced at $299. And it's gradually climbing up the charts. And I'm thinking, this is crazy. But the thing is that when you're featured, I'm horrible with time zones, but the way being featured works is in Eastern time in North America, every Thursday at 4 p.m., Apple switches the list of which apps are featured. And so I knew that this featuring would be amazing, but a week later, on the next Thursday, it would stop being featured. And I was so afraid that it would just fall right off the app charts again. And so I did what I like to call the experiment. And this was basically just putting the game on sale, really. And it was an experiment because I was afraid that at a third of the price, I was going to end up making a third of the money. But I had a feeling that this could actually pay off. And so I dropped the price to 99 cents. And then I wrote a really detailed, honest blog post. It's kind of basically like this presentation up to this point, almost. And then I posted on Reddit, asking for support. And I basically said, "Dear Reddit, with your help, my iPhone game can overtake Angry Birds, for real." And this was the story I was trying to create, this David and Goliath story of this little iPhone app trying to take on the mighty Angry Birds. And so to give this a little bit of background, around 2 weeks before this happened, Cut the Rope had come out, and it had knocked Angry Birds down to #2 on the App Store. And so I knew that at #2, you're much more vulnerable to be knocked down further than you are at #1. And I had studied the App Store charts like intently and watching kind of what happens when certain apps go on sale and kind of how that all works. And so I had this feeling based on almost all the studying I'd done up to that point that this could actually really work. And so I posted on Reddit the whole Angry Birds thing, and then this story got picked up by like everyone. And so the story was picked up by like just a few, like Boing Boing and 2how, like all these tech blogs, all these Mac blogs, all these gaming blogs. Like everyone loved this story of the kind of little indie app trying to take on Angry Birds. Touch Arcade also finally reviewed the game, and so that was pretty crazy. And so all these factors came together at the same time. And it wasn't just the Angry Birds story, it was also this blog post I wrote. So everything was coming together. And so the sale was a huge success. So within 48 hours of putting the game on sale, it climbed all the way up the charts to number 2 ahead of Angry Birds. So that was insane. Like I was like, I can't believe that actually worked. Like that, it was ridiculous. So I'm a big fan of like giving out actual sales numbers for everything. So to tell you some more numbers, on the best days when TrainYard was number 2, it was getting over 40,000 downloads a day at a price of 99 cents. So that was crazy. Like that's still crazy. And so Apple takes 30% of that, but still, like that's insane that you can make that much money in a single day on the App Store. And now TrainYard, kind of like what Kepa was talking about earlier, like TrainYard is not your typical casual general audience iPhone game. And so it stayed up at number 2 for a few days and then dropped down to number 3 and gradually kind of fell out of the App Store charts. But it's still been really successful for me. So to give you some more sales numbers, to date I've had over 800,000 downloads of TrainYard, and TrainYard Express has had over 4.3 million downloads. So that's crazy. Like this, I don't know, to me it's still mind-boggling. Every time I talk about these, it's ridiculous. For something like I made in my spare time, I would be so happy with these numbers if I had spent like 5 years working on a game and got numbers like this. So it's just crazy. And so since then, I was finally able to quit my job, and I've started my own company, which is really just me working at home, just trying to make cool, interesting iPhone games. So that's the end of side A. That's the first part of the story. And now I'm going to go into kind of a few mini, frequently asked questions that people have had. So, okay, so first of all, technology. Technology, and tech to me means like what framework you're using or how you're developing iPhone games. To me, tech is just a tool. It doesn't matter. People get so caught up in how they should be developing apps or whatever. Like, use whatever you're familiar with, use whatever your friends are using. There's no right answer. If you actually work hard at it, you will end up with a result that's great. It doesn't really matter what you use, so don't get caught up in trying to make decisions forever and ever and ever about technology. App pricing, which is like a super common, like contentious topic. So Kepa actually touched on this earlier. So 99 cents versus $2.99, and $2.99 really refers to any price other than 99 cents. If you have a price, an app at 99 cents, you've got to appeal to a mainstream general App Store audience. With any other price, you've got to have more of a niche market because basically with 99 cents, you're relying on the App Store and on Apple to promote you. So either getting featured or getting high in the charts. At a price that's higher, you have to do some promotion yourself outside the App Store, driving people to your app somehow. And finding, like if you're making like a space trading game, find some forum online where people who love space trading games hang out and tell them about your game. Push people to the App Store. So that's kind of the difference between those two price points. So paid apps versus free apps. Again, Kepa talked about this too. Kepa stole my whole presentation. No, I'm just kidding. So paid apps, the paid charts are incredibly static. Every time one of these big apps comes out, it steals a slot from the paid charts. And the paid charts every day, every week are getting constantly harder and harder and harder to break into. But the free charts are much more dynamic, and they're constantly changing. And the other really big thing about this is that when you have a paid app, by the nature of how paid apps work, the amount of money you're making is directly tied to your actual chart position. If your chart position is high, you're making a lot of money. If your chart position is low, you're making not a lot of money. When you have a free app, you could have a high chart position for a few days and get hundreds of thousands of users, and then drop off the charts completely and still be making money for days and weeks after that point from those users. So obviously there's a lot of kind of moral issues around freemium games and all that sort of stuff. But at the end of the day, it makes a lot more sense for an indie developer to seriously consider going with free apps because of how much more flexibility there is and how much kind of, it's almost just a more level playing field. It's not so top heavy like the paid app charts are. Luck. So this is the thing. Everyone talks about the App Store like it's a lottery. And I've said that myself, but the difference is that the App Store is like a lottery where it's really, really hard to even buy your ticket. You need to have an amazing app to even have a chance at success in the App Store. So people who say like, oh, you know, you have a 1 in 500,000 chance because there's 500,000 apps. Like, that's ridiculous. There are not 500,000 good apps. There are at most a few thousand good apps. So you're not competing against everyone. You're competing against those few good apps. But you need to have a really good app to even be able to start to do that. Also, none of the factors are actually random. And what I mean by that is that, like, when TrainYard got featured by Apple, there wasn't some guy sitting there saying, like, with some dice saying, like, okay, if I roll Snake Eyes, TrainYard's getting featured this week. Like, there's real people. It's not mysterious. I mean, it is mysterious, but it's not completely magical. Like, there are real people making real decisions based on trying out your app and deciding whether they think App Store users will actually like it. And at the same time, the top charts, there are real human beings sitting there buying hundreds of thousands of apps a day based on factors like their icon and their screenshots and whether their friends have recommended them. It's real human nature at play. It is not random at all. And you have to be prepared to capitalize on your big moment when it happens. Now, for me, that was kind of creating the story of TrainYard versus Angry Birds and creating the blog post. And for you, it may be something else. And often, especially for games, people don't just want to write about the content. They're often interested in kind of the story surrounding your app or your game and kind of what makes it interesting. Not even necessarily what it can do itself, but the actual story surrounding it. Research. So this is like, if you want to be serious about the App Store, take us a lot of time and actually study the App Store. Treat it seriously. Watch what happens when apps have sales and spend a few $100s and download all your competitors' apps and really see what's going on. I see a lot of people, even me when I first started out, just kind of releasing something and not really knowing what was going on. Like, it's fine if you want to just treat it as kind of a hobby, but if you're serious about it and you want it to be something that is your job, then treat it seriously and spend a lot of time and effort really studying it and actually knowing what's going on there. Delight. So this is something that's, it's not just like make your users happy or make your users delighted. To me, the term delight implies something kind of specific. And you'll actually hear Apple kind of talking about this too if you listen to some presentations some people at Apple have given. But to me, it means giving your users specific moments of delight in your app, specific moments that are amazing to them. And as game developers, we actually kind of get this by the nature of how games intrinsically are delightful. When I'm struggling on a TrainYard puzzle for 2 hours and then finally solve it, that just feels good. When I fling a bird in Angry Birds and kill all the pigs on my first try, that just feels good. There's a certain amount of delight that just happens there. And if you have an app that's not a game, it's a little bit harder to have that delight. And sometimes you have to spend some effort to actually manufacture that delight a bit more. And one of the most powerful ways to do that is to have Easter eggs. I'm kind of surprised that I feel like every single app should have some Easter egg or a few Easter eggs. Just like if someone pulls too far down some scroll view, or if someone shakes an app on the wrong screen, like a crazy video plays, or they get to play some mini game or something, that Easter egg will lead to instant word of mouth. Someone will take your app and say, look what I just figured out you can do in this app. You have to download this app because I just figured out this crazy thing in it. And not only will that happen, but potentially the person who discovers that Easter egg will be some editor for some iPhone blog or whatever. You just never know. the amount of effort it takes to implement that Easter egg compared to the amount of effort, compared to the amount of effect it could have is huge. And finally, I want to talk about motivation. So everyone has their own reasons for doing what they do, but I think it's really important to know what your actual personal goals are. And my thing has been to write them somewhere I will actually see every day. So if you're working, this is especially important if you're working in your spare time. You come home, all you really want to do is just like sit there and watch TV or something. But if you see those goals there, it'll make it a little bit easier to sit down at the computer and work for a few hours and push towards it because you know why you're doing it. You need that goal there to constantly remind you of why you're doing what you're doing. And if you have kind of specific, well-determined goals that you know, it'll make decision-making easier. You can kind of almost filter every decision through that goal and kind of see two choices, and you can figure out which one of those two choices is going to bring you closer to your goal than the other will. So it actually makes decision-making easier as well. And I think it's really important, even if you're working in your spare time, to work towards your goal every single day. It doesn't have to be doing art or programming or whatever. It can be just like sitting on your couch for 15 minutes with a notepad, coming up with some new ideas. If you're constantly pushing towards your goal, you have a much better chance of reaching it than if you just kind of work on it sometimes when you feel like it. If you have kind of like a system of constantly doing a little bit every day, eventually you'll keep working there. And then finally, working towards your goal is great, but sometimes it's incredibly hard to do. And the thing that makes that a little bit easier is to work on things you enjoy. And for me, that was TrainYard. And so, like, there were moments when I was dealing with trying to, do Twitter integration for like the third time, or dealing with crazy Objective-C memory errors, and it was frustrating and really painful, and not the sort of thing you just want to come home from work and do. But at the same time, because I knew that the end goal, the end result, was something that I was going to be extremely proud of, I had that goal to allow me to push through it. And so I guess that's really the message I want to leave you with, is that if you work on projects that you enjoy and things that excite you, and you know what your goals are, and you work constantly towards them every single day, eventually you'll reach them, and you'll be left with something that you can be really, really proud of. So thank you.